Okay, it says we are streaming live. So, hello everybody. It is very good to have you all here. Thank you for coming. It's Sunday, and maybe some of you had other events taking place. Maybe some of you wanted to spend time with your family, and still you are here with us. Thank you so much. We invited today Albena Azmanova, a person and a professor of political science at Kent University that we had on our show before. She is known for her involvement in 1989 uprising that took place in Bulgaria. She has a prominent academic career. She currently teaches, as I told you, at Kent University, and her latest book was a hit, Capitalism on Edge: How Fighting Precarity Can Achieve Radical Change Without Crisis and Utopia. And we had a lengthy discussion about this book because I find it very, very interesting. Now, while reading this book and some other articles written by Albena, I came across a very interesting article where Albena discusses feminism. And there she discusses how feminism became success by failure. Why is that? Because somehow individual advancement, individual rights took place of the collective progress, of the class struggle, and of the idea of all the women advancing together. And it evolved into some sort of aesthetics of feminism, or what I like to call glamour feminism. It is a feminism that is based on superstars. Superstars like the author of Lean In, I don't remember right now her name, is a famous manager that wrote a book about women in power. And this idea that the best women can hope for is to join men into an oppressive system, and as Nancy Fraser tells us, to share equal shares of inequality, basically, and to join men into this oppressive system. So this is why Kamala Harris basically is just a feminist. She became a feminist icon, and it is very interesting how that happened. And many on the left even, and many feminists are cheering up, saying this is a wonderful moment for feminism, since we have a representative, a female representative, even a woman of color, being the vice president of the United States. Things like her public record and the fact that she was involved in politics for many years, and she took some very harsh measurements against people of color while she was serving as a DA in California, seemed to be ignored. Now, all we are talking about is her being a feminist icon and some sort of how should I call it? The feminist icon. That's about it. Now, the title, because maybe some of you were surprised about it, this title that I chose, Who Sews Kamala Harris Clothes, is inspired by Catherine Marsal's book, Who Cooked Adam Smith Dinner? And it was about the work and the labor women do for men that is actually ignored, and it is a way of subsidizing basically capitalism. But we went from who cooks Adam Smith dinner to who sews Kamala Harris clothes. And it was after we came up with the title that she was criticized actually for wearing Dolce Gabbana and for wearing all these brands. And they found it quite controversial. She had a picture in Vogue. She wears Converse. Their Converse is owned by Nike. And we all know, or hopefully we'll know, what kind of problems Nike had with workers and the way the company treated them. So Albena, sorry for this lengthy introduction. I just wanted to make sure that everybody understands what we are here for today. And without further ado, please tell us more about yourself, your article, and the ideas on glamour feminism.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I think it's a very clever way to frame it with you know, the image of the women who are somewhere in the world are producing the glamorous clothes through which Kamala Harris is projecting this image, the success story of feminism and the anti-race progressive politics in the US. So it is actually, I understand that the idea is to use that as an entry point to see what's going on, to see the larger picture. So this is just our, you know, entry point into the story. So we have all been exposed, you know, to the enthusiasm with which Kamala Harris has become the cover story for the triumph of feminism and anti-racism in the US. You know, we have heard appeals to little girls to imagine themselves becoming the next president of this and that country. So the emerging counter story has been that rather than the cover story for the triumph of progressive politics, she's actually a cover for the return of the neoliberal policy formula that the two main parties in America have been implementing, at least since the Reagan administration unleashed the neoliberalism in the 1980s. The grounds for such expectations of a return to, you know, to the good old neoliberalism are that the policy record of both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have been to support this agenda of corporate America prospering at the back of workers. Well, both of them took a somewhat left-leaning stance in the primaries for the presidential nomination, which contrasts with their conservative record in terms of policy implementation previously. But here's what I would say to that is this does not matter. They're given a fantastic historical opportunity to effect a radical policy shift. They might still make that shift despite their previous record. So I would say, let's not talk at the past, but let's look at the signs of what is emerging. Now, well, just to clarify what I mean is that, look, Barack Obama was the first Black American elected to the presidency, and he had the chance in 2009 to undertake a radical policy shift, and he didn't. He chose actually to enforce the neoliberal story that was taken by the conservative administration. Maybe the Biden-Harris team would do the opposite. They're expected to continue, you know, the neoliberal trajectory. They might undo it, and that it's still possible. The jury is still out. But here is what is at stake. So the story of the rise of Donald Trump as the expression of proto-fascist tendencies in the US displayed how sick American society is. And I mean, not only the rise of Trump to presidency, but also the fact that something like 74 million Americans still voted for him after 4 years in office. The fact that you know, so many people stormed the Capitol in a protest against the elites. So this is all telling us how sick American society is. And the Biden-Harris team need to lead a very radical change to heal America. This is their historical task. This, in order for this to happen, this would require a renouncement of the policy formula that actually created the social conditions for the rise of Trumpism. As you mentioned, the political theorist Nancy Fraser, who was also my professor in the university, has called this formula that created, the formula that was implemented since the 1980s, progressive neoliberalism. Not that neoliberalism was that progressive, but that it arose as a combination of two elements. It was a deal between the center left and the center right on the following terms. So on the left, the Democratic Party pushed the progressive politics agenda of multiculturalism, gay and lesbian rights, gender equality, ecological policies. The right wing added to this the endorsement of free market. So that was their deal. So the Biden-Harris team has the historical task to reverse all this. But let's look a little bit into progressive neoliberalism. And I propose to see 4 elements that they actively need to undo. First, this is the economic policy in favor of free markets. This has created a highly competitive context in which things like education, personal wealth, family background, and other cultural characteristics, including where you come from geographically, gives you a competitive advantage. This context profited the large corporations because they're more competitive than small businesses, for instance. This context profited people who, through all these characteristics, were well equipped to do well in this competitive environment. The second component of the model I call neoliberal progressivism. So it is not just the progressive formula of the civil rights movement of the 70s. It's a very peculiar version of the civil rights non-discrimination agenda. It is very important to understand how the anti-discrimination agenda was hijacked by neoliberals, because this is what we suspect that Kamala Harris glamour feminism is actually promoting. So let me clarify that second element of neoliberal progressivism. See, when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his speech, I Have a Dream, that was in 1963, he spoke of eliminating discrimination on basis of race. So he said, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So you can apply this to anything, not judged by their gender, not judged by their preference, sexual preference, etc. So justice was supposed to be about de-racializing, de-gendering social life. Instead of this, the neoliberal left promoted identity politics. And there's a huge difference between anti-discrimination and identity politics. So they embarked on positive discrimination, promoting specific groups. Maybe the intentions were good. However, this resulted in minority groups competing for victimhood in an increasingly unfavorable or competitive environment, in which free market capitalism increases the competitive pressures for all, but we have groups who are competing for little privileges, for victimhood, to be protected. So in such a situation, victims fight other victims: women, Black people, Jewish people, brown people, immigrants, gay and lesbians, transsexual people. They're all fighting each other as victims, while the perpetrator or the culprit, capitalism, with its competitive pressures, goes unnoticed. It runs away unnoticed. So it is in this way that neoliberal progressivism is not only compatible with capitalism, but strengthens it. So identity politics is a form of hijacking the non-discrimination agenda of the 70s. And it is actually strengthening capitalism through it. The third element is the discourse of meritocracy, of cultural supremacy. So these elites who are somehow equipped to win the game of competition, they also speak with this hubris of elites who, tell the masses from the position of supposedly earned or merited superiority how they're supposed to behave, how they're supposed to speak, who claim ownership of the language of political correctness, together with the right to scorn those who don't know, how to apply that language. And sociological surveys have showed that those who vote for Trump, the Trump vote, were particularly annoyed by that posture of elite hubris, because it implied an insult that common people were too stupid to know, or they had to be told, how to speak, what to think, etc. So this is the cultural, I call that the cultural supremacism of the elites. And the fourth element of this, the neoliberal form of capitalism, is the stress on personal effort, on individual responsibility, on personal success. Typically, Barack Obama, already during the presidential race in 2008, he advised Black Americans, he said, brothers should pull up their pants, as if all that it took, to succeed in life is to get your act together, make an effort to succeed. And as we know, the lowering of the pants has to do with it's a gesture of protest against the incarceration of Black people. The pants are hanging because they're taking off their belts, like in prison. So it is a gesture of rejection of structural racism, and instead of that, they're being told to get their act together and make a personal effort. In terms of feminism, so this has all shapes up neoliberal feminism. It urges women to lean in, to make an effort, to play the game of the rat race together with men, to be successful in the labor market, to learn the tricks, make a personal effort, make a personal success story. And I have argued that in this way, rather than joining forces with the working class movement, which was indeed male dominated, for the liberation of labor from capitalism, from the rat race, women in fact gained equality and inclusion within a very nasty game. Inclusion within this system, but they won that empowerment by surrendering to the logic of the market economy, with all the negative consequences we're very well familiar: alienation, self-exploitation, destruction of nature. So they missed a historical opportunity to join forces with men to change the system. So instead of doing that, they started competing with men, weakening, in fact, the struggle of people against, against capitalism. So curiously, the neoliberal formula of feminism that competes with men for place for equal treatment within the rat race also accommodates elements of the traditional conservative image of being a woman. So women are playing a decorative, subordinate function to male success. They have to be sexy, cute, glamorous, personally attractive, because these are all tools to compete with other women. So this is all tools to compete, to be successful in the competitive pursuit of profit. So these are features, this cuteness, personal appeal, features women exploit to get ahead in a very highly competitive environment in which men still call the shots. So there is a very interesting accommodation between the neoliberal stress of women to make a personal effort to succeed and the conservative, the old-fashioned female appeal based on sexuality and cuteness and kind of subordination to in supportive role. So I'm saying all this because the Biden-Harris team needs to lead an effort to demolish all four of these elements of neoliberal progressivism. Let's remind ourselves which are they. Free market capitalism, one. Two, identity politics. So replace identity politics with genuine anti-discrimination fight. Second, meritocratic, that's the third, meritocratic hubris. And fourth, individualism, or the stress on individual responsibility, individual success. So I've been looking for signs. It is still early on. Maybe they will be able to do what history calls them to do, what history gives them a chance to do. The jury is still out, but I'm sorry to say that Kamala Harris has so far shown spectacularly poor judgment. So I am not very hopeful. And let me tell you why. Starting with the victory speech that she gave just as the outcomes of the presidential race became known. She addressed her supporters with the words, "You have won the fight for the American soul." So basically, she told the 74 million Americans, that's about 47% of the voters who voted for Donald Trump, that they lost the battle for the soul of America. This is exactly that neoliberal hubris that the Trump vote rightly despise. Why not just call these people a basket of deplorables? So neoliberal hubris still there, very much, very visible. Second, Kamala Harris likes to speak of herself in terms of personal success, very clearly prioritizing the personal in all the stories we have heard so far. During the Democratic primaries also, as compared to the other contenders, she was the one who most clearly put the stress not so much on policy, but on personal attacks against Trump, against the threat of Trump, rather than specific policy. In an interview shortly after the electoral results were known, she was asked what would her role be in the presidency, in the new as a vice president, and she said something like, "Well, I'll be there every day to remind the president of my personal experience as a woman of color." So again, personal experience as a woman of color. So remember this element of the stress on the personal rather than the systemic and the structural injustices. And then her appetite for glam is also very visible. She's making a huge effort to be liked. She smiles a lot. She's making an effort to be cute, to be likable, playing the cute card as this element of conservative feminism I mentioned, the woman as a decorative element in the male-dominated world. She cannot resist the limelight. This appearing in the Vogue amidst one of the greatest political crises in America. It was in the week when the Capitol was stormed. So the racial minority glam was very much on display, and I bet books would be written on that soon, at the inauguration when her nephew showed up in sneakers. So that could be interpreted as a slap in the face of elites. So yeah, you show at inauguration it's sneakers, right? It's a protest against the dress code of the elites. But it turns out that those were $2,000 Nikes, which equals 275 times the federal minimum wage per hour. The federal minimum wage is $7.25. So this is really, in my understanding, very symptomatic of this kind of neoliberal glam that is part of the problem, certainly not part of the solution. So, but I was, thinking also that there's good news in all this. Want me to tell you what the good news is? How can it be? How can be a good news in all this? Well, when Margaret Thatcher in the 80s launched the neoliberal agenda, it became clear that women can be very good at doing bad things. When the first Black president, Barack Obama, did the same, it became clear that Black men can do bad things. Probably it will become clear that Black women, Kamala Harris, can also very well practice very terrible policy. And this will finally, probably liberate us from the dogmas of identity politics that are only serving the game of rampant capitalism. And finally, we will focus on what matters, on class, on the way we produce and live our lives, and bring us back to this degendered, deracialized humanism that we all need, to treat each other with dignity. So this is from me. This is how I read the situation so far.
Oh, thank you so much for your talk. Hope our viewers and those here with us in the meeting find it interesting. I find it very interesting, and there are important things to say. We are not raining on anybody's parade. I mean, if you want to be happy that finally a woman of color is vice president, then be happy. There's no point in saying you shouldn't be, but let's not forget what this means in terms of actual progress, because you may be personally inspired, you may be personally enthusiastic about it, but let us be realistic and reasonable about what really happened. And I urge you to read I urge you to read Albena Asmanova's article on the emancipation and how feminism became in the United States a success by failure, because it allowed women to enter the labor force and to compete with men, as I told you, for equal shares of inequality. And the fact that I would like to say just two things here. First, it is by no surprise that this happened. I mean, a very dark chapter that goes unscrutinized in the history of feminism, and especially of US feminism, is the CIA involvement in the leftist movements. We have here invited Harriet Fraud. She labels herself as one of the founding mothers of the women's liberation movement. She was there. She organized marches for the women's liberation movement. She was there with the Black Panthers trying to organize events, so she has a lot to say. There is also an important book that was written about a very interesting CIA operation. It is called the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom in the early Cold War, that was written by Sarah Miller Harris and was published by Routledge. So a very serious publishing house that publishes this book on how the CIA, through this operation that is called the Congress for Cultural Freedom, advanced that type of progressive politics that suited the elites, advanced that type of feminism that was in the best interest of the elites. And I discussed the involvement of Gloria Steinem, that is on public record and is being revealed since 1975 in the USA, that Gloria Steinem, the feminist icon, was a CIA operative. And Miss Magazine is still being widely read, even though it was financed by the CIA. And the Red Stockings Collective that denounced Gloria Steinem is just somewhere in the fringes. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Red Stockings Collective and their effort to denounce Gloria Steinem as a CIA operative. And while this involvement of the Secret Service in the US could never explain everything that happened in the feminist movement, but because they cannot control everything, this has to be taken into account. I mean, the elites have their ways of implementing the type of progressive thinking that they like. And this has to be also tackled, I think. It's a dark chapter, but since we have now access to the records of the CIA, we can investigate this and we can see how the elites implemented the type of leftism that they liked. Because there were 2 points, 2 main objectives in the activity of this organization. First of all, it was they wanted to have left intellectuals that were critical of the Soviet Union. And second of all, they wanted to have left intellectuals, leftists that were basically severed by the masses and severed by the working class and considered the working class like deplorables. And finally, they succeeded in these objectives. And as I told you, even though not everything can be explained, this has to be taken into account because you see all these movements, the feminist movement is not operating into a vacuum. It is, of course, influenced by the elites and by their tools and their strategies to take it into the directions that they like, that they suit, that suit their interest, that is in their best interest and not in the best interest of working class American women. Now, this was the first point. The second point is that this is very interesting that even Kamala Harris's father denounced her because she said she smoked pot because she comes from a Jamaican family. And this has to do with this type of reinforcing the stereotype of Jamaicans smoking pot, of her being a very funny and very easygoing person, even though I don't think that was the case while she was in the Justice Department and she took harsh policies. There is one very controversial law that she advanced and she wanted to implement, like the ones of taking the children away of the parents if the children do not attend school. That's a very controversial one, and many, many others. So these are basically the 2 things that we have to take into account when we discuss Kamala Harris. Now, she discusses a lot about her mother, about her being a child, this infantilization, you know, of politics, of getting people to like you because you were nice as a child and your mother was nice, and using all types of PR tactics to get under the skin of people and not debating real policies, because I would have liked less nicer Kamala Harris that would have advanced policies like maternity leave. I don't know, maybe some of the viewers don't know, but in USA you don't have paid maternity leave like we have in Eastern Europe. So yeah, you have to take this into consideration, because while you cheer up for this very nice person that does her best to be likable, you tend to forget the politics. This is like a reality show. So she's best in transforming politics into some sort of reality show. And I saw that interview that you sent me, where she said, because she was asked, are you going to implement like Medicare for all? Are you going to be the socialist in the government like the right-wingers accuse you? And she says, no, not at all. I'm here to give Joe my perspective, and that is the perspective of a female of color whose mother emigrated while she was 17 from India, and so on and so forth. So she's basically there not to represent working class women, but to represent her identity, you know. And I find this to be like the death of politics, you know, when you transform everything into a personal story and to a reality show.
Yeah, that touch of entertainment through which capitalism closes the eyes of people, you know, because we're spectators rather than, you know, involved citizens. And so vice presidents usually take on some portfolio. She has not taken any portfolio. She's really pushing a personal story, the face of anti-racial and feminist victories, but she has not engaged yet with any specific policy, and that is really typical of this kind of feminism that in fact weakens women. Yeah, because it presents them in this subordinate, frivolous, decorative position. Yeah.
And I would not like our viewers and the others in the media to understand that we don't like nice women, we don't like to dress up, or this is not the point.
That's not the point.
Let's not mistake that for real politics, for real things that you do for the others. You are not there just to be decorative and to play this card. You are there to represent people, and you are there to solve very important problems that are basically destroying US society and the world, since what happens there has a huge impact on the whole world, since they are so powerful and they are this neo-colonial power that influences
no, indeed, it's
everybody.
The thing is that we shouldn't see it as a either or. I mean, it's not about about neglecting how you dress and how you look. It's where you put the emphasis.
Yes, yeah. This is exactly so, because we are not here to shame her because she's pretty okay. We are not here to shame her, but the idea that she constantly emphasized that and her personal life and her as a child, that is
the way that, agreed. Yeah.
So Boyan, would you like to comment on what we said here? I saw that you took notes. So.
Right, thank you. Well, before I comment,
between feminists to professors from academia, so you said they're quiet, so it's time for you to.
Time for the student to speak, right? Or to ask. Yeah. Okay. So first, I want to thank you for this introduction, because it was pretty enlightening for me, actually. Not from the point of view that I didn't know all these things, because I actually did know them. Some of them intuitively, some of them just, you know, by acquisition of knowledge that I get from the news and so on and so forth. But, you know, the way you formatted this for me was pretty enlightening, particularly in these 4 points, like free market capitalism, identity politics, meritocracy, and individualist obsessions. You know, this kind of puts all these things that are spinning up in my head, that have been spinning up in my head for the last, I don't know, decade or so, into some kind of order. And so, yeah, I thank you for that. And well, you know, on the other hand, it gives me the kind of feeling that when I come to think, for example, about the Polish left, and I'm based in Poland, okay, that's maybe important from the point of view of what I'm commenting on right now, is, you know, when I come to think about the Polish left, and all these four elements that you listed out, they're checked off. they are all these things, So, and here's an explanation why they keep losing. And it's not only in Poland, of course, it's pretty much all over Europe. But that's, of course, a different conversation entirely. What I want to say is, I like what you said about Kamala Harris individually, in a way, about her personality and about what she demonstrates, about what she emphasizes, because I think that as much as I don't like, of course, speaking about people, I like to speak about processes, I like to speak about phenomenon, I like to speak about events, okay, that are sort of part of a schema, okay? But this particular thing, I mean, this particular person, Kamala Harris, she's just begging for it. Okay, because with all these T-shirts, I was that little girl, this self-centered attitude, this, narcissistic exposures that she, and obviously you said it yourself, she likes the glam. Okay, so she loves to be photographed, to be all these things. And I kind of come to think that it's actually important to also make it a part of the political analysis of why Kamala Harris actually became the vice president of the United States. Because let's think of the history of her nomination, if one could, describe this process as a history. So she basically had no chance. Okay, once she was confronted during the discussion, during the primaries in the Democratic Party, okay, before the nomination was granted to Joe Biden, or was won, as some would argue, by Joe Biden, then, she had this confrontation, a pretty famous one, with Tulsi Gabbard, okay, the Democratic congresswoman from Hawaii, where she, on live television obliterated her. Okay, yeah. She destroyed her, like, and that was pretty much the end of Kamala Harris's run. So what does it mean? And like, her ratings fell down to 1%, 0.5%, or something like this. It was a game over for her. Mm-hmm. So in fact, what must have happened afterwards, and of course I have no secret information, it just the logic of the circumstances says that she must have been handpicked afterwards to just become the vice president, okay? And I think that partially it could be exactly because of her personality, because she fits perfectly with her attitude to herself. And also, you mentioned her father, and I looked up her father, and her father has a pretty decent record. I don't know if you know that, but he was some kind of Jamaican socialist, labor leader. I don't have the information right in front of me, his biography. I just remember my kind of impressions from the moment when I read it. And she had this very harsh relationship with her father, okay, because there was some kind of bad, very drastic divorce between her parents, and she carried a lot of ill feelings, from what I gather, vis-a-vis her father, and her father criticizing her after she said what she said about smoking pot, and her being a hypocrite, basically, because what she did was like extra repressing people of color in California in order to satisfy her white bosses. Okay, that was the situation, and I don't want to go into the details of that, but that's a very gruesome stuff. Okay, what she did in California as a DA there. This, and particularly these T-shirts, those T-shirts, like, I was the little girl was me. Sorry, that kind of to me, it speaks to the fact that she's relatively easily manipulatable, if that's a word. You know what I mean? That she could be manipulated easy, right? In a way that, and again, I don't want to go into the psychology of this, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a specialist here, but it just, from general culture, okay, from general knowledge, that when people are so vain, all right, and she's just the walking definition of vanity. And of course, it's not like there is no presumptions for that, like physically, materially speaking. Maria said it herself, she's handsome, young, energetic, obviously she has the potential to become a person like that. But, and she's successful, okay, in terms of her career, if this is a success. But the worst thing that you can do to a person like this, if you want to exercise control over them, it is to to pamper them all the time. Like, you go ahead and tell them, oh, your personal experience is fantastic. You are an absolutely, indisplaceable person. And this is how they are grooming her to do whatever they will want in the future. That's my conclusion here. Now, I don't know whether you will agree with this or not, but this is the kind of personal element that I think is worthwhile sort of discussing. And now I totally agree with you. That Biden and Harris, they don't necessarily have to do what their record kind of indicates they would do. All right, they don't have to go down that way. But I'm all for giving them a chance, and and so on and so forth. The problem here is that I would have been much more prone to give them a chance had I seen any vision. And these 3 B letters, back, build better, or build back better, whatever the arrangement of the words is, it makes no sense anyway. This shows that they have no idea and no vision. Okay, unfortunately, and this is the most saddening element here, is that when I look at Joe Biden, I not only think of the gerontocracy, of this late Soviet gerontocracy. Okay, when it comes to yes. and all these things, they're very similar, really. And in terms of aesthetics and attitude and the Absolutely. Kind of worldview, but also I kind of tend to think, I just can't help but think about von Papen in Germany, who right before Hitler came to power, he was like, no, everything is going to be okay. We're going back to the ancien regime. We're going back to the old status quo. Don't worry, things are going to be as they used to be. Well, I don't think so. I don't think they're going to be as they used to be, because too many people are angry. And as much as I agree with many left-wing philosophers and sociologists who say that we should not really be so happy about the popular anger all over the world, because anger itself doesn't solve many things, okay? But it definitely can influence the class balance of forces, okay, no matter where the anger goes. And this is something that, this disbalancing of class forces, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they will have to contain this. And now, generally speaking, historically speaking, maybe I should say, capitalism has 2 ways to go in this critical moment that we are in. Like, it could either give some concessions to the working class and become slightly social democratic, or at least less barbaric than it is in America. Okay, that's what Bernie Sanders advocated for, right? And so there is a tendency for that. Or it could, become this uncontrollable, fascistic, proto-fascist, you name it, right? Which movement, which easily gets out of control and does all kinds of stupid things, led by all kinds of idiotic conspiracy theories, like the guys that breached the Capitol, okay, on the 6th of January. So I think that there's the major problem here is that they don't have a vision, or if they have, their vision is let's roll the clock of history back, like some 4 or 6 or 10 years. And unfortunately, and I agree with you that Barack Obama, he had a great chance. And I believed much more in Barack Obama than I believe in Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, because Barack Obama, I remember the snippets that I've seen on the TV back then from the great gatherings on central squares of the major cities across the United States, where people were cheering like it's the next Hugo Chavez, okay? And he was really empowered by that. And I was very careful. I really carefully have observed at the time how things developed, and I just saw that at the end of his first term, he gave up on everything.
He squandered all of that.
Yeah. So he gave up on everything, including, which was most hopeful for me, foreign policy, because he actually brought Russia and NATO together in Lisbon. I think it was 2000. I don't want to get into the dates because I can't remember. I'm not very good in chronology, but it was a very important thing. And then, at the end of his first term, things changed drastically, and he just gave up, in my opinion, on the kind of empowering maybe independence, bits and pieces of independent agenda that he had. Anyway, so I'm kind of doubtful whether Kamala Harris and Joe Biden could do anything. But of course, if they do, prove me wrong. I'd really be glad to be wrong here. Okay, and you know, on the question of what should they do, you're totally right, and I couldn't agree more with you, Albena, when you asked the question, what should they do? And it's so obvious what they should do. First of all, we're in the middle of a deadly pandemic, which exposed the most barbaric feature of the American capitalist system, which is lack of popular health care. So the first thing they should do is they should enact a single-payer healthcare act. That's what they should do. But of course, they don't seem to be very eager to do that, right? Now, going to the question of discrimination, anti-discrimination, you know, the success by failure and all of this, I want to say that that this is, like you said, exactly what I've been thinking about for the last, I don't know, 5 years maybe, but you just put it in 5 minutes, and it's really fantastic. It's like the question of this victimhood competition. I mean, I see it all around me, okay? And it's all these groups that you listed out, right? You said women of color, but transgender people, Jewish people, or whatever. And, you know, we, the left, okay, we have a universal solution, okay? We want to, at least we want to offer it for debate, a universal solution, you know, the global emancipation of the working class and so on and so forth, and establishing a kind of egalitarian society. But no, that's no deal. That's not interesting, because they want to compete, like who's better, who can, you know, get a bigger cut of the cake, or the bigger cut of the small part of the cake.
Of the small part, yeah, of the leftovers.
Yeah, the leftovers, the crumb. You're totally right. And you know, you're totally right that, you know, women can be evil, Black people can be evil. And I remember a couple of weeks ago, we spoke to an American Bulgarian academic, Arto Artinyan, who teaches in New York. And he said, at the time, they were still contemplating who's going to be the defense secretary, and it was going to be this Black former general at the time. I don't know if he actually became the defense secretary finally or not, but that doesn't matter. And he said, look how primitive the American politics have become. You know, it's going to be fantastic, because we're going to have a Black person, you know, bombing countries halfway around the world from where he's based. You know, and this is somehow a success. All right. So I definitely feel that this is becoming more and more obvious. Only the problem here, preventing us from actually noticing that it's not what we should focus on, whether the person perpetrating war crimes on behalf of the American establishment is Black or white or Jewish or whatever, or transgender for that matter, you know, is we should not really pay much of an attention to that. But the problem is that we are faced with a huge propaganda machine, and I think we have to acknowledge that, because it's really great, these PR tricks, okay, which are being played with us all the time. Unfortunately, it does bear fruit, and we definitely need to have at least some kind of organization when it comes to the discourse. We're going to be combating this this sort of well, weird phenomenon, okay? It's weird, even by our Eastern European standards, okay, to say that, oh, it's fantastic, we're gonna have the Minister of War in America is gonna be Black. Wow, let's cheer, you know. This is, yeah, so that's, and the last thing I wanna say, I mean, there's many others, but I don't want to, you know, I don't want to dominate here, like in terms of the amount of time that is, that I speak. I want to say that the question of individual success is also very important, but very important not only from this political point of view, because it's obviously politicized, but you know, this also is very poisonous to the entire society and to their everyday, to their experience of everyday life. Okay, look, because success is very important for everyone to have. People want to have success in their life, and they deserve to be successful in their lives. Okay, but the way Kamala Harris and the others are selling it is that you have to become a rock star, or you have to become Jamaican, Indian vice president of the American empire in order to be successful. Well, that's not
Absolutely, very
true.
narrow definition of success,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
defines everybody else as the loser.
Exactly.
That's
Success.
a trademark of meritocracy.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Exactly. You're exactly right. I wouldn't have thought about formulating it exactly that way. But this is, you see, success is a feeling. You can just feel like a rock star when you achieve something in your everyday life without becoming a president or the vice president. And this is the kind of precious thing in the masses' everyday life that is taken away actively by people like Kamala Harris. And I think it's very destructive. And particularly in America, where you have this huge growth of what is now referred to as diseases of despair. Okay, people suffering from all kinds of psychological issues. Okay, this is they're just adding gasoline to the fire by doing this.
So whatever you do, you will be a failure, basically.
Yeah, whatever you do, you'll be a failure. Yeah.
But I don't know if it is a good time for me to try to disagree with you a little bit. Yeah.
Well,
okay.
I see now. I just want to say for the others in the meeting, thank you for being here again. Now, if you have questions, suggestions, please go right ahead. We are waiting for your take on what we've said here, and we are very curious to see what you think. So go right ahead. If not, we are going to continue the debate. Please, Albena, just say what you wanted, because I also have something to add to what Boyan said.
If there are people who want to speak, let them speak immediately. Questions? Nobody's coming forward.
Nobody's coming forward.
Then I will throw in two things that came to my mind just now. So build back better actually is not a bad slogan. It's true that it is not very radical and it is not bringing new energy. But as I say in my last book, Capitalism on Edge, my analysis is that contemporary capitalism has made the game so competitive that everybody feels precarious, even the rich, even the successful. So this is an epidemic of precarity that is affecting not just the non-educated, the poorly skilled, and the poorly paid. So when we live in conditions of precarity, of insecurity, you become very conservative in your longing for security. So that is why the left went, the vote went to the right. Now, also in a very competitive environment, people do not develop a sense of solidarity, but rather of hatred, of competition, of the opposite of solidarity, whatever that is, right? So acrimony, suspicion. So to counteract all of that, you need some sort of a not very radical discourse, in fact, because the radical discourse might scare people and might push them even further to the right. So it is clever to promise stabilization, and build back better promises that stabilization. But that then you have to deliver that stabilization, and in order to deliver it, you really need to build the commons. You build the very robust social services, welfare state. So you have to rebuild, in a leftwards direction. So that's one remark. Another remark is, I think the left has made a big mistake to stress so much equality or the fight against inequality. This has become the left's mantra, in their critique for the rising inequalities and the solution to seek for equality. Solidarity and equality are very different things. Remember, in our regimes in Eastern Europe before they fell, the really existing socialism, well, those were relatively egalitarian societies, but were they solidaristic? Actually, political oppression and economic scarcity made everybody very competitive and very nasty to each other. So there was not much of a social capital. This is not a true socialist society. So solidarity is the real value, not equality. And in fact, Marx has spoken against wage equality in very beautiful terms. It's worth looking up the text in the economic and philosophic manuscripts of 1844. In the chapter is strange labor. Check it out. It is not about equalizing wages. It's about changing the system, because the more equal become, or even when we involve workers in the running of companies, they become invested even deeper in the interest of their companies to pursue profit and to exploit and to destroy nature, etc. Those were my two thoughts I wanted to add.
I want to say also something. Now, they said, the Democrats said that they are going to have some sort of relief plan, and they want to give people money. Now, the problem is that they are going to borrow those money, and they are going to borrow the money from those who are already very rich. They're not talking about taxing the rich. And in the United States specifically, those who own bonds and shares are not taxed. And those are the places where most of the wealth is. They are not talking about ending fiscal paradises. They are not talking about planning somehow at least some parts of the economy, because if you stay in this competitive environment where nobody, as Albena said, even the privileged ones are not feeling safe, you are not going to solve much. No. So they are basically trying to mimic, because it's very interesting how they are trying to mimic progressive policies. They are trying to mimic emancipation, and now they are trying to mimic some sort of relief plan by borrowing money from the wealthy individuals and not by taxing. This is very interesting. So they're still playing the games of the elites. And since you said, well, the jury is still out, just look at the most recent measures that they took. They want to have a relief plan, and they want to have it by borrowing money. And I think this is economically very controversial, if not suicidal. I mean, tax where it has to be taxed, and of course plan a little bit, because you see, when you have things planned in a way that is not based on the pursuit of profit but the welfare and the goal of serving the mass of the people, you may have some results. Otherwise, you are just patching things. You are just finding a solution right now, and then it's going to blow up in your face, because borrowing money is not the solution right now. And they don't have to look far. If they look what Roosevelt did when they had the crisis in 1929, he taxed the rich. I mean, he did not base his policies on borrowing from the rich, but on taxing the rich, even though they didn't like it. And they fought ever since to undo what Roosevelt did. So it's a historical moment, and they are still trying to come up with tricks and not real solutions. This is the first thing that I would like to say. Now, the second thing is that, as I told you, we might be happy for her personally, and it truly is inspiring. Let's not to be hypocritical here to see a woman of color in that position. It makes you feel good, okay? It's a feel-good politics. And we must, in a world that is so pessimistic and perspectives are so bleak, even a small ray of hope is important. But on the other hand, my fear is, and I don't know if you share this anxiety, that this does we are at the point where this type of tricks are going to play a role against us, and this type of mimicking feminism and women's advancement is going to do more harm than good, because in the long term, what we are going to see is that this type of person is going to do, as you said, a lot of bad things, and then what? Then what?
Well, then we will have to focus on the essential, on securing everybody's.
A second Donald Trump that is going to be less crazy and more focused and more dangerous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's the likely outcome if the Harris Biden team fails to do what we just spoke about. Yes.
So I see that there are no, we have 15 guests. No one wants to address a question or say something. If not, I saw that Boyan wanted to say something also.
Right, I just wanted to comment briefly on what you just, Maria, said about Kamala Harris being maybe a ray of hope in this pessimistic world. And, you know, this is something I kind of want to push back a little bit because you know, one thing that I'm pretty much against, and the left has been doing that, at least, you know, the left that is in the closest vicinity of me, okay, here in Poland and in Eastern Europe, they are kind of preaching hope that, you know, eventually things are going to be okay. And then they kind of amalgamate with the liberals on that, because the liberals also, they started preaching hope recently, and it's going to be okay, not because Kamala Harris is president, or maybe because of that too, but because, you know, the vaccines are coming, the pandemic is going to be over and stuff like that. And I'm personally against that preaching of hope, because I don't believe there's much hope at the moment. And I think it's much better if we're honest to the base, to the people that we're trying to appeal to, and say, look, everything around us is totally messed up, and we have to, you know, we have to totally rebuild it, totally restructure it, give it a new architecture, and we got to have like a totally different approach, not just you know, cosmetic changes here and there, and because it's not leading anywhere. And I think in this sense, I'm kind of against what you, Albana, said about build back better. I'm sorry, to me, it still makes no sense. Build back better, it just makes no sense. Same as better back build. It just, for me, kind of words, you know, words. What are you reading, my lord? So, it's, I have the feeling that there's a general, of course, I'm not a researcher. I don't have the data right in front of me that I could quote to you, but, you know, my feeling, my observation, my reflection is that there's a huge demand for radical changes. And people want that not just because some of them realize that there is a climate disaster looming ahead of us, not because some people realize that there's systemic oppression, although many did upon the killing of George Floyd. You know, I mean, systemic racist oppression in the United States, I mean, right? Not because many people have actually realized that there are all these incentives, okay, for us to be anti-systemic en masse, but it's because they are so tired. Okay, they are so tired with these years of neoliberalism, because neoliberalism, and let's face it, it's, you know, it really failed. I mean, it failed everywhere. It failed economically, okay, because it produced mass poverty all over the world. And in places like Bulgaria, for example, you know, or Romania for that matter, it really threw us from, let's say, the second world into the third world, because regardless of the fact that we are in the, technically speaking, in the European Union, we have all the features of a third world country in Bulgaria, okay? So, but that's a different conversation. You know, there is so much, how to say this, well, political capital maybe for preaching change and radical change. And the problem that the left has, or we have, with the general situation is that, the right, they took a note of this. They sort of made this observation, okay, and they present themselves. They have been presenting themselves in Europe and in America, and Donald Trump is a part of that culture falsely. And Donald Trump is a con artist, okay, so for him it was very easy. But they present themselves as being anti-establishment forces, and they really make fools out of us, because you got to be a complete moron to believe that someone like Donald Trump is anti-establishment. He's just, like Barack Obama is the face of the establishment, then Donald Trump is the rear end of the establishment. That's what it looks like. Okay? And this is pretty much the situation, and I think it's much better. So here I kind of disagree with you on this, that instead of appeasing people, I think it's better if the left actually creates another alternative offensive methodology and propaganda that is just going to be more inspiring to people, because it's going to be real and not a pack of lies like Donald Trump and make America great again, or I don't want to quote other right-wing populists, but on the question that has to do with the question of inequality that you mentioned. And I think you're right that you're right to say that the left is obsessed with inequality. I agree with this, and I don't think any obsessions are good, but I think that it's not like a mistake that they had discussed it and they've come to the conclusion that is mistaken, that we're now going to run on inequality. The problem is that the left, has given up on its most fundamental program, which is the program of progress and change. And this positive postulates, okay? The left, unfortunately, by merging with some liberal forces, it kind of presents a very negative program. They are against certain things, like they are against inequality, for example, but they are also against, for example, industry, because industry destroys the planet.
And the defensive, right? Yeah, the left is on the defensive.
Yeah, exactly. But it's on the defensive. But it's also seen because when you say I want to be against inequality, I want to people be more equal, and then I'm against the heavy industry, I'm against all these kind of things. It's first of all very easy to confuse people, and second, it kind of makes you what is your position really? What you want? Destruction of things? You want destruction of wealth? You want destruction of industry? You want destruction of civilization? That's the message that comes through. And it's a very wrong message. We don't want to.
I agree.
It's
facile. It's very facile. It's very easy, but it's very dangerous.
Yeah. So that's kind of, and of course I totally agree with what you said in the beginning. Actually, the two of you kind of said it, that the rich, as much as we don't like the rich people, of course, and we might not like power, authorities. Okay, I'm a left-wing person, like a classically left-wing person. I hate authority and power and that kind of stuff. But I know they're needed, and I want them. I demand them. I think that it would be much better, not easier, definitely not easier, for the left to start knocking on the table and start saying, we want money and power too. Give it to us, because we also need that in order to satisfy the needs of our base. Okay, but that's of course a different conversation. But I agree that the rich, they also live in a cage. It's just a golden one.
And they're coming to be rather aware of it. As I note in my book, I have some interesting surveys where millionaires are complaining about the rat race. Because the elites are educated to value a different kind of life of leisure, of travel. So there's this dissonance, there's this tension between what they have to do in order to win at the competitive game and the kind of life that they value. So for me, this means that a very broad alliance of forces might be forming against the competitions of the capitalism as a gain of competition for profits, and there is something that might come from that. I don't believe in the class struggle. I believe in counter hegemony, put in a short term. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't need to be poor in order to be on the wrong side of. You don't have to be poor in order to be on the right side of history. You know, you can be poor and be
Yeah. And be evil.
pro-capitalism, and you can be rich and want to change the game. Engels was an industrialist.
Yeah, I know, but I think what you're presenting now is a very simplistic kind of superficial view of class struggle. I mean, it's not about who's rich and who's poor. I mean, it's
right. Okay, it's about ownership of the means of production, but nowadays even that is not where the thing is played out. Because
yeah, okay. Well,
as we see in China's type of state-owned capitalism.
Well, okay. Look, I don't want to go into this because we're.
Yeah, let's not.
No,
I think there's some
with
questions
the
from the public.
capitalist, for
Yes,
example.
yes,
But
we have some questions. Finally, we have a question from Peter. He doesn't want to ask it himself, but he is written here his question. He says something like that: I've only recently started to educate myself about politics, and the dictionary I use defines left wings as politics of political ideologies favoring political and social equality. So it doesn't make sense for the left to become focused on inequality, he asks. Why aren't we focused on inequality? Why don't we just say that this is the main characteristic of the left-wing politics?
Well, yeah, the left is very much focused on fighting inequalities. But as I was saying, historically, this has not been the main value for the left. The main value for the left is solidarity, commons, living in a society that takes care of the common interest. For instance, Karl Marx defined the fair society not as one of equality, but the formula is from each according to their capacity to each according to their needs. So that's not equality. So I think that it's a very symptomatic that the left has adopted this language of equality, because look, when you're talking about equality and inequality, you're comparing individuals, right? Me versus others. You're not thinking about the common. You're only thinking about individuals and the groups in which they belong and comparing to each other. But this is the typical neoliberal focus on individuals. So it is a symptom that this neoliberal focus on personal welfare has permeated the left and has closed our minds on issues of inequality rather than issues of the commons, of our common life, of a common good. Yeah, so I would not agree with those dictionaries. That dictionary definition that defines the left as an ideology of equality is not correct.
Yes, and it has to do also with economy, and not only inequality is the basis, but also ownership of the means of production and competitive production of profit. And I very much liked what you insisted on in your book. It is not only inequality and redistribution that we have to focus on, because it is also the production of the wealth. It is not only how we redistribute or distribute the wealth, but how we produce it.
Right.
And
Very
also
so.
this equality and equality of chances is a very tricky concept, because if you apply equality for people that start in very unequal positions, there you are only strengthening basically the inequality. And this is the mantra that has been sold to us, like equality of chances. What does it mean exactly? Let us think, what does it mean in education? If you have a child that doesn't have shoes to wear, how does equality of chances, like the state guarantees free education? Okay, it guarantees free education, so you have equality of chances. But if someone is so poor that has, and we have unfortunately, 70% of the Roma population in Romania is living in extreme poverty. Those children have no clothes, have nothing, have nowhere to bathe. I mean, it is very difficult for them. So how this applies, basically, how does this help? Because if you don't have this idea that you have to build solidarity and actually to help those in need, you solve nothing with this idea of equality. And there were memes being made about those who are being, left on the side, and there's an equal, threshold. And it is so tricky, to focus only on these things. But I also think it has to do with propaganda. We were so much cornered into not saying anything about socialism, solidarity, class struggle. All these words became tainted somehow, and you were easily smeared if you dared to say them out in the open. So the only type of criticism was based on inequality, and I think it was the book of Piketty that basically made it through. So he basically showed with numbers that inequality is rising, and that inequality is very dangerous. So this is why I think most of us just how should I say? So he made it through, and now we are following along the same lines.
It's a fashion, it's a fad. I think it's very dangerous. I think actually Piketty's work is very dangerous.
But I think it is some sort of cowardness on our part also, because he made inequality acceptable. You are not longer a pariah if you talk about
inequality, yes. But as an economist, you should know better and mark that there's difference between poverty and inequality. People suffer not because somebody has more than them. People suffer because the essentials of life are not secure, like healthcare and education and housing. So you cannot base such important things on a matter of personal welfare. Nobody is rich enough to secure good healthcare for themselves, because that requires a lot of investment in medical development, scientific development, in appliances. So nobody is rich enough to secure that. It has to be secured by society.
We have another question from Stephanie. Can you pose the question? Do you want me to read it, Stephanie? I see that
I don't see the chat, so you should read it.
I thought maybe she would want to come.
Yeah, I can. I'd rather not turn my camera on because it's 10 a.m. in the US and I just woke up. But hi, Albana. I was one of your former students from BSIS.
Who's speaking? I cannot see the name.
Stephanie.
Stephanie, all right.
Yeah, I was in some of your classes. Hello.
Lovely.
Yeah, I was asking a question. This was from a discussion maybe like, I don't know, 20-ish minutes ago. It just has remained in my head. You were talking about hubris and political correctness on the left. So this month in the US is Black History Month, which has kind of reinstated all these debates about what language we use, and this political correctness is brought back to the surface. So, I mean, as you're talking about marginalized groups competing for victimhood, I'm almost wondering if this political correctness is almost a distraction from what's really going on, or do you think that the language that we use actually matters as people fight about whether Black should be capitalized or whether it's African American? And I mean, similar debates are going on the LGBT communities, and it just seems like it's almost not even addressing the real issue.
Okay, I think language matters, of course. If you always use an insult to talk to a person, then that becomes mainstreamed, and becomes how people start to be perceived. But language is a sideshow. We should not think that it is all about language. That it's people think that they change the language, they change reality. No, I believe I deeply believe this is wrong. and people should not be felt to be afraid to speak their mind because they don't know whether they should say African American or Black. So that is what a lot of people cannot cope with, and that's very alienating, because then only a very small minority of academics know the latest acceptable language and kind of use kind of the dictatorship of that. They're empowered through that knowledge. And it can have very negative outcomes. I think so. Basically, we should relax about language and be less focused on that.
Yes, and let us not forget that, of course, language creates reality. Of course, language is power. As Foucault said, now the peace is the war fought with other weapons, basically discourse. Of course, it is important because it creates reality, but let us not forget that it is a tool. And if the tool becomes a means of communicating an end in itself, then we have a problem. Because while it is very important to have these debates, it should not replace the critical thinking about class struggle. It should not replace thinking about real solutions in terms of economy. It should not replace us being together in solidarity, and it should not become, as Albena so wonderfully said, a tool for disciplining others. This is not Foucault. I mean, I have so many things to say here. First of all, it is so interesting, Stephanie, to see that you don't see this type of fights where Foucault writes, where Derrida writes. You don't see this type of fights taking place in Paris, isn't it? You see this type of fights taking place in the US. And there is a wonderful book, I can recommend it. Why is it that critical theory became so successful in the United States? And why is it not in Paris, where those people actually live and wrote, that you have so much sectarianism and transgender activists fighting with lesbians and all sorts of minorities at each other's throats? Why don't you have this type of thing at the source, you know, where these people wrote? And second of all, Foucault was not about disciplining. I mean, he wrote a lot about how language is used to discipline. So you're basically anti-Foucault when you use language to discipline others, because he was critical of that. He wanted to deconstruct that. And he said, and also Derrida said in a wonderful quote, that if you deconstruct, but you only do that to replace one person at the top with the other while maintaining the hierarchy and the hierarchical structure and the system, you are not solving the problem. So I think here what we are seeing with all these fights about language is, first of all, the peculiar success that the critical theory had in the US, combined, and I'm sorry to say, with lack of proper reading of Foucault and Derrida and all the others, because they are somehow transformed into the very thing they were criticizing at some point.
Right. But also it's a certain softened type of critical theory based on the communicative turn that Habermas enacted within the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School, the first generation, they wrote about consumerism, they wrote about the political economy. They were very much focused on the way people, made sense of their life, produced their life, distributed. There was very much focused on the material conditions and the ideological structures of capitalism. And then the second generation with this communicative turn. This is the type of critical theory that became fashionable in the US, and that's regrettable. That got hijacked by the neoliberal capitalist class.
And it's such a shame, because when you say critical theory, they start to criticize altogether Foucault, Derrida, all the French thinkers that were. They are not thinking that only a small part of their reasoning was transformed into a fashionable nihilism.
That's right. That's right. It's very selective, very, very partial.
And it's unfortunate because it is important to have cultural struggles, but not this type of. It is so interesting how they were transformed into this type of deconstruct. They are not really deconstructing anything, you know. They are just trying to weaponize their oppressed identities and to replace the oppressors. They are not trying to change.
Exactly, to claim power through monopoly of knowledge of the political correct. So that's very empowering if you claim power on that.
Yeah, we are approaching the end of our discussion here. Thank you all for being here. If you or Boyan have anything to say, to add to our discussion.
Right. So I just wanted to say thank you to everybody, and particularly Alvena for taking the time, to be with us. And thanks for sharing all the insights. I think it's very valuable. And for me, it's kind of very. Well, I said previously that I'm against preaching hope, but this is very hopeful because otherwise. When you're rational and when you're trying to interpret the world in a rational manner, and when you try to apply rationalism to politics and stuff, then you kind of come to the conclusion you're a dying species because no one around you wants to do that, right? So I think this is very important that the left is able to to present rational conclusions and rational talking points in this very crazy political reality that we're in. And it's very crazy, particularly, I mean, maybe not particularly, but one of the reasons it's very crazy is because, this culture of competing victimhood, I think this has been very, very toxic for the discourse and for the general debate. And that's one of the reasons, that prevents the left from, exercising, and this is a very important exercise, to accommodate disagreements, because we should be able to disagree. And our disagreements should be healthy when they are managed properly. They could be healthy and they could be very fruitful. And otherwise, we're just sliding down this sectarian nonsense. So anyway, thanks again, Alvena. That was very valuable for me.
Thank you very much. Go to our Patreon page. Please become our supporter. We need your support because we live through difficult times. So, okay, we saw also Boyan's daughters. So please become our supporter and keep fighting. What should I say? Stay healthy and keep fighting. Thanks so much, Alvena. Bye.
Bye.